I guess recording all of that stuff, the changes.
Yeah.
So let's back up a bit. We'll kind of review that in a different way, and then also think about the large country case. I want to give you a new way to think about maybe the exports and the imports. Those of you who had principles class, which I guess is all of you, do you guys remember the eyeball trick? Maybe you just remember the eyeball trick, but you don't remember anything about it. This will kind of come in handy as we get into exchange rates and stuff too. So I want you to graph put three graphs side by side, three lines, the vertical and horizontal axis. And we can give me a country, first country that comes. Norway, all right. And give me another country, somebody else. Switzerland. The Swiss. All right, so there's a bunch of other countries too. Let's see, what's are we good at? Norway, and I think we got caviar. Maybe we're talking caviar market. So we've got the quantity of caviar and the price of caviar in each country. So the quantity of caviar and the price of caviar. If these countries don't know that the other one exists, then some natural market forces within each country are going to determine the domestic price, the autarkic price within each country. And so let's say that we've got, you know, I might as well get some lines going here first. Let's do this kind of one. What I want you to do is do kind of equal spacing here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's go up to 6. And then on your graph, I just want you to extend some hash marks all the way across the page. And let's say that Norwegians have a supply and demand curve that are intersecting down here at $1. I don't care how curves, but have them intersecting at $1. So caviar is traded at $1 in Norway, and over in Switzerland, it's at $5. So again, just draw any old supply and demand curve, whatever your slopes end up being, that look like this. Who's got the comparative advantage in caviar? Norway. How do you know it? Okay, so they can do it less costly, right? So their equilibrium price is lower. In autarky, they're at $1. So they're going to be our exporting country, right? Whoever's got the comparative advantage is going to be our exporter of this good. So the Norwegians are thinking to themselves, well, I'm fine and dandy having the country to ourselves. If the world price is $1, then I'm not going to sell any caviar to Switzerland or America or anywhere else in the world. I'm just going to sell it all to my domestic Norwegians. However, if somebody offers me $2, I'm going to sell it to them because I'm not that fond of Norwegians, right? I'm more fond of the dollars than I am of my own countrymen. They can go find something else to eat. So if the world price is higher than $1, they're going to start selling to the rest of the world. So if it's $2, for instance, the supply curve of caviar producers is here. They're going to increase the quantity that they supplied to that amount. Norwegians are going to cut back on domestic caviar because it is priced higher. They might start eating some salmon now or substitute into something else. Who knows? They're not going to go starving, so we don't have world hunger problems we're trying to solve here, especially in the caviar market. So we've got this distance here represents what? The amount of exports. So the quantity supplied by Norwegians is here. Norwegian consumers are buying that much. So what I'm going to do is take that quantity and watch, everybody watch this for a sec, since we don't have the advantages of digital motion here. Right there. And so this horizontal distance is that horizontal distance. And what we're starting to map out here is the Norwegians' ability to sell that caviar to the rest of the world. We're going to create the world market for caviar. And bear in mind, this is how much of this excess is being dumped off into the world market, and that's why we're just transplanting that quantity. Norwegians are still eating plenty of caviar, notice, right? There's just some that's now being dumped off to the world market. Okay, so that's the concept with our exporting country. The Swiss over here are the high-cost country. They're normally paying $5 for caviar. They're more than happy to pay less if they can find it elsewhere. Again, they like their Switzerland producers, but they don't mind buying caviar from the rest of the world. And so if the price of caviar is $4, then Switzerland, the Swiss caviar producers, are not going to be able to make as much as they used to before. Consumers, on the other hand, still want more than ever. The quantity demanded exceeds the quantity supplied. They are now, what's that?
That means there's a shortage.
Yes, there would be a shortage.
But the excess in the world market goes over.
We're going to look to the world to say, hey, I'll buy it from you, if you can supply it, right? There has to be an equilibrium. I mean, they have to have a buyer. So there's a willing, what we're kind of establishing here is a willing buyer on the world market. So if I take this horizontal distance now and transplant it over here, that shows the amount of imports the Swiss are willing to do at a price of $4 on the world market. Okay.
Could you write out what we did just so I know what that's my notes?
Yeah, I'll write a summary after we're done.
All right.
That's okay. I'll write a summary after we're done. So, at $5, how much would they like to import? They wouldn't. So that's a point on the import demand curve as well. How much would the Norwegians like to sell or export if the world price is $1? 0. So that's another point. Now you're starting to see, connect these 2 points, but don't connect everything yet. We're starting to create the export supply, the supply of exports, and the demand for imports. And these two parties are going to meet in the middle somewhere. Now, I said that I didn't want you to complete the whole thing because where they're going to meet depends on what you guys drew on your paper. You created your own world market, so I don't want you to steer you. So I want all of us to do the eyeball trick. The eyeball trick is this. At the end of the day, what the Norwegians sell, what they export to the world, is what the rest of the world bought from them. So exports must equal imports on the world market, which means that these two horizontal distances got to be equal. As you go up with your left eyeball, that horizontal distance starts to grow. As you go down with your right eyeball, that horizontal distance starts to grow, and find out where they're equal. All of us should come up with different answers on where that happens. I think mine is narrowing in right about here.
Mine's pretty close to that too.
Well, mine is $3.37, so yours should be something different than that. That's how precise my eyeball trick is. So figure out where you've got those two distances equal to each other. That is kind of the most crucial point of this exercise. Has anybody got any questions? You will not see this one in the book, by the way. This is Russ McCullough bonus special. There'll be bits and pieces of this, but the reason I like to give this to you is that this helps put together pieces that you'll see in the book. Like you'll see this picture, or you might see this picture, but this kind of puts the whole thing together. This has been, I didn't invent it. I think I saw this in a textbook a long time ago, class I took, but not everyone does it the same. All right, so this equilibrium point that you found then, of course, transplant that next here. That's where supply is going to equal demand. So that distance represents the amount of imports. Now you can connect the dots, and you just created the export supply curve and the import demand curve for the world. And this is what we've been labeling in what we've done so far, the world price, PW. So the price in the world of caviar is, in my picture, $3.37. That's going to be the price that clears the market in the world economy. We've been spending a lot of time on this picture, right? So here is PW. Last time with the tariff. All right, please speak up now. Are there parts of this that you don't get? Okay. So we imposed a tariff last time. We're Switzerland. The Switzerland caviar producers are farmers. They've got kids and diapers, and so they go complaining to their politicians that, hey, we can't handle this world competition. It's not fair. We can probably develop a comparative advantage someday down the road, whatever. And so they successfully get the government to impose a tariff at the border. So if the world price was $3.37, maybe they were able to pass along a 50-cent tariff. So when the Norwegians come across and they get confronted with the 50-cent tariff, that's going to be added on to that world price in the small country case. And then we see what happens here is that that's going to reduce the amount of imports going on by the Swiss. The domestic producers, this is a review from last time, by the way, the domestic producers are going to increase their production because of the protection, because the price within Switzerland is going to be $3.87 rather than $3.37. So they're kind of catching a free ride on the tariff. All right, so let me get this down in the steps. So the eyeball trick to international trade. So number one, each country has domestic situation and autarky price. they got their own supply and demand curves. Doesn't matter what they look like. The low price country means that they have a comparative advantage in that good. They've got a comparative advantage in that good, and then they're going to be specializing in that good. That'll lead to them, they will be the exporter of that good. So that was our Norwegians. The high price country has comparative advantage in another good that we don't know about, and that means they're going to be the importer of this good or that good. I'll just put on here caviar. That's not how you spell caviar. Caviar. At the end? Caviar? Caviar? Alright, I'll look at that. Okay, so step number 4 is, at the end of the day, imports must equal exports. Imports must equal exports. So, prices change to determine the world price. The price that equalizes imports and exports. That's about it. I guess the only other thing we could maybe throw in here just for fun would be, there's the quantity demanded, the quantity supplied. If this is, we did this the other day, if this is 1,000 and this is 700, then the amount of imports are 300, which is this number here, is the world amount being exchanged. I didn't really define these here. This creates the export supply curve. That was our ES, and the import demand curve. So, last time we went over the small country case for the tariff, which is what I just kind of reiterated here. Did anybody have any questions on that? Why don't you, flip back at your notes from last time. Is there anything in your notes that I can clarify about how we add the tariff on? And then we did kind of the analysis with the letters. Is that all clear?
For some reason, I remember intermediate, the tariff was a vertical region.
Okay, actually that's where I'm going next.
Okay.
So that's a good question, and that's the difference between the small country and the big country case. So just remember, small country, this is the Bahamas. They're just kind of a drop of water in the bucket. They impose a tariff. Some company comes here and they say, hey, I've got $3.37 worth of product for you that I need to be paid $3.37 for. And they just say, oh, okay, there's a 50-cent tariff. Another way to think about it is, do you remember when how the tax, I don't know if I should go down this path or not, but if we had a supply curve and a demand curve, and we did the tax, the vertical thing you're talking about,
Yeah.
how it passed it all off to the
Yeah.
consumers.
Yeah.
So if this is my $3.37, and yeah, that's the wedge, and if I put a tax of 50 cents, all of that gets passed to the consumer, right? That's kind of what's going on here, right? Because this is the horizontal part. The world price is like a perfectly elastic supply curve. And so they're just adding it on to the price, so that full 50 cents is getting passed along to the Switzerland consumers. The Switzerland PCers over here are paying the full freight. Okay, anything else? Okay, so what if we're a big country? If we're a big country and we impose, if we impose a tariff, and we represent a large fraction of the of the trade that's going on in the world market. So if we're the United States and we impose a 50-cent tariff, it's going to impact world prices because we're a large fraction of that. So now we get back to imposing and maybe I'll get away from the 50 cents thing here and just do the vertical part. So now we're back to this picture rather than this picture. If we impose a tariff in here and we do the wedge thing where the height of the wedge represents the amount of the tariff. So this is the tax of the tariff. A tariff is just a specialized form of a tax, but it's on imports. The price where it touches up here represents the price that the consumers pay. Where it touches the supply curve touches or shows where the price that the producers will receive, what we call PP and PC. The difference being the tariff revenue going to the United States government. A couple things to note that are just like what we saw in principles class with taxes is that this area here represents the amount of tariff revenue going to the United States government. The amount of trade that's going on was reduced. We were importing 300 units, and now the quantity after the tax, QT, or the quantity after the tariff is something less. So we're getting the same type of results that we did with the tax case in a domestic situation. And so how that translates over here is we go back to our large country now being Switzerland. How is that going to impact the market? And we're going to see a difference here on the price. The book calls it PW star, like how the world prices have been driven down. And the price to the Swiss, the price with the tariff, PT, is higher. And the difference is that wedge. The imports ended up still getting reduced by this horizontal distance. Which is this distance now, pulling it off of here. This is the picture in your book. I'm merely using this to kind of help facilitate the thought of what, because this to me is confusing. If you just read this in the book, the text is okay. If you read it, it'll support what you're looking at. But this picture doesn't quite make a lot of sense to me without having a little more background on it. So the argument that is made here on the difference between the small country case and the large country case is that if I was at $3.37 with free trade, and I added $1, let's say this is $1, then I would be jumping it up this much, PW plus this. But with the large country case, it ends up creating the wedge that's lower, and so the consumers actually end up paying just a little bit more. And there's not quite as big of an effect, a negative effect on the imports in the large country case.
Why is that?
Part of the tariff ends up being paid by the producers in the other country, right? Before we were passing it off, we were able to pass the buck off to just the Swiss consumers. And now, because of our market power, if you will, or since we're a big player in the market, then we're able to pass some of that tariff off to the producer.
And the amount that the producer pays is based on the elasticity of the good?
Dependent upon the elasticity of the good, yes. Yep.
What's the differentiation between a small country and a large country?
Oh, that's a good question.
Fine line.
It would be kind of small enough that you don't make up a large fraction of the trade. So, for that matter, it could be on an industry by industry basis that you might be a big player in one market but a small player in other ones. That could be a possibility. If we look at coffee beans versus cars or something, we might be a big player in one market but not in the other.
But for like an exam, you would tell us if it was big country.
Yeah, you just get big country case or small country case, yes.
So essentially, a big country could bully and tax a small country because small countries can't pass a tax off easily. So, but it's
yes, that's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. So if Switzerland is the big country here, and they impose a tariff, well, they're able to pass that buck off to the rest of the world a little bit more. So they can use their power. So yeah, it kind of gives you that result.
That's where the world WTO comes in. Is like, no, it's too much of a tariff.
Yeah, it's kind of worse when we have more and bigger countries involved, because then each one is doing the same game, and it basically causes trade to probably more exponentially drop rather than increase like we want it to. So yeah, it's a little more harmless, right? In the small country case, it's a little more harmless because the world price still stays at $3.37. It's just the Swiss that are paying more. So it should be the Swiss who are complaining, the Swiss consumers who would be the complainers on a tariff in the small country case. Although the Norwegians aren't too happy because they're not selling as much product as they were before either. Their price didn't get hurt, but they're not selling as much. So there's still a deadweight loss to it too. Okay. Anything else there? So a new level of complexity, or another level of complexity. I guess the large country, small country is a new variation that you haven't seen before. And another interesting element to this is that whether a country tariffs final goods and services or intermediate goods and services, or both. So we talked about intermediate goods before, goods that somebody has done some value add to already and put it into the production process. And so if we look at an automobile, for instance, there might be a lot of intermediate goods. We saw how Canada and Mexico and the United States have a production process that's like, well, this part's made down there, and this part's made down there by American people, but this one's made up there, and we kind of get it all together, right? So we get all these intermediate parts together. And there's some interesting stuff that comes out of this. So I want to do a little example here of a DVR, a digital video recorder. And I'm going to create 3 columns. The first column being what's going on with free trade. The next column having a 30% tariff on the final good, the DVR on the final good. And then the last one, having a double dip. We're going to go 30% on the final DVR and with a 50% tariff on intermediate goods. So some of the components that are used in the DVR. So you can imagine a country has, well, the country can do darn near anything they want. If they're not in the WTO and they haven't agreed to some conditions, they might go this way, they might go this way, they might do both. So if the DVR is at $100 in the world or around the world, so the world price of a DVR is 100. If there's a 30% tariff on the final good, and this is the small country case, what is the DVR going to sell for in this country? 130. We're going to tack that tariff on. So 130 is going to be the price. Now, before we go too much further, I want to start dropping down a couple more columns here. So let's say that the DVR has components from the rest of the world, so intermediate goods, of $60, leaving us with a value added, the value add of 40 for the United States. Let me just use the United States as the country we're talking about. So the United States has $60 that they import from Indonesia and China and other things, right? So $60 of the $100 DVR is from foreign components. And then the Americans put in 40, and that's what makes up the 40 plus 60 equals $100 price. You with me? Now, if we have a 30% tariff on final goods, how does that change? Why is it still 60? Yeah, we're still going to the Indonesia and China, and we're still buying these components for the same price, right? So the value add has to be the difference. So it's the American value add. Now that's a soft number, of course, because we've got the government in line here driving up the price domestically. So the value added now for American companies under this generic thing of value add is the difference. So they have $70 worth of value. Okay. So, what if we calculate the effective rate of protection? The effective rate of protection, the ERP. And the ERP is going to be equal to the value added, the new value added, let me put a 1 here, maybe I'll put a 2. Value added in the second state minus the value added in the first state of affairs, which would be pre-tariff, divided by the old number. Just new number minus old number divided by old number. Same way we've calculated percentage changes in a number of different areas. So under these circumstances, we've got the United States getting $70 into their pockets from the protection, right? Minus the $40 that they had before. So this is kind of revenue generated, right? Revenue after, revenue before, divided by 40 gives us our do it in 2 steps here. 30 over 40, 75% protection. Notice how that's a little bit different than the 30% tariff, first of all. So 30% tariff led to 75% effective protection of the industry. So that's the one first thing that's a little bit novel about this approach.
So that's saying when other countries bring their stuff to our soil, we're 75% protected because of our tariff.
Yes. Their extra money that they're driving the price up is all gravy for the American producers of the DVR. Right? Because if we go back to this picture, we still have Americans producing the DVR. They're just producing less of them now that we opened up for trade. Right? So then we add the tariff, the price goes up, but it doesn't go up for them because they're American producers. And that effectively lines their pockets with a extra 30 bucks. And so 70 minus 40 gives us the 30 bucks divided by the 40 where we were at, 75% protection rate. We'll pick up there Friday.